given that the vast majority of us in this room are age 39, according to Jack Benny, if we attended American schools, we learned cursive writing. We know, though, that cursive writing is no longer taught in American schools. Is this a bad thing? No. It's tradition and change at work. In 2022, historian and former Harvard president Drew Gilpin Faust wrote an article in The Atlantic titled, "Gen Z Never Learned How to Read Cursive." Faust laments that her students, now all born after the year 2000, cannot read script. So they cannot decipher the documents in their original, like the Declaration of Independence. She also adds if they have family heirloom letters, perhaps from a world war, that's written in cursive, they can't read them in their original. She admits in her article that it was a correct decision to not teach cursive anymore, but she wants to express the loss. Gen Z will now have to ask for help to read their heirloom letters, and they'll have to read a transcription of primary source documents like the Declaration. But that's just like many of us. If we're Ashkenazi, we might have original letters in Yiddish. And I'm sure that Farsi literacy is also declining, and people will need to get those artifacts deciphered. That is the way of tradition and change. And yes, the fact, though, that we cannot read our ancient documents or just even our heirloom documents doesn't make them any less important. The changing world just requires that we teach our children different literacy skills, and we rely on experts to help us with the older documents. And in some ways, actually, this makes the older texts a mystery, more exotic, more sacred. And this is the case with the Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll. It is clearly an exotic text with a lot of differences than contemporary publications. And yes, requires some expertise to write and also decipher. We know that it's written on animal parchment. We don't use those anymore. In a unique script, I'll talk about that in just a little bit, with organic inks with specific rules on how to make it, and specific writing instruments. The parchment pieces are sewn together with animal sinews and are attached to wooden poles. We even call them atzei chayim, the trees of life. And of course, there's many differences. Ashkenazi Torahs are read lying down and put a cloth around it to cover it. Sephardic Torahs are put in a harder case and often read standing up. We refer to the Torah, obviously the Torah scroll, as Torah shebichtav, the written Torah. And we proclaim at every service that we read it. Sephardim actually do it in the beginning of the Torah reading. Ashkenazim traditionally did at the end. We would say, V'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe b'fnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai bi'ad Moshe. This is the Torah that Moses brought before Israel from the mouth of God to the hand of Moses. According to tradition, Moses wrote the first Torah. So question, was Moses' Torah look like ours, the one in the Ark? The ultra-Orthodox, perhaps more fundamentalist answer is, of course it did. It's the same Torah that Moses had, copiously copied from generation to generation. They even quote a Talmudic text where Moses is writing the crowns according to God's instruction and says, God, what's with these crowns on the letters? There's different traditions in how which letters have crowns. And God says, Rabbi Akiva is going to come and is going to be able to interpret the Torah based on where the crowns are on the letters. But the historical source and even other Talmudic sources say otherwise. Hebrew script, the alphabet, developed over time. Here's a time for show and tell, and people can definitely come up afterwards and see it. But I don't want to give a whole PhD thesis on this, but the alphabet came from the Phoenicians and was actually developed in the Middle East. Before that, there was also sort of cuneiform, a whole sorts of things, Rosetta Stone, and things like that. What's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet? Aleph. Anyone know what an aleph is, actually? It's a cow prod, okay? Used to train cows and to train bulls. Well, you can't see probably from here, but the original aleph looked like a cattle prod, okay? How do you say house in Hebrew? What's the second letter of the alphabet? Bet, okay? The first one was a little square. Didn't have a roof like that, but it's a house. Okay, last example, because I don't want to go through all of them. How does anyone say I in Hebrew? Ayin, okay? What letter does that sound like? Ayin. What do you think the first ayin looked like? An eye, okay? It literally is like this sort of oval with a dot in the middle, okay? So it was kind of pictograms a little bit, but there were 22 of those that then became to use sounds. And then it developed over time. You can see even the Latin alphabet and the Greek alphabet are part of this family. Hence the word alphabet, alphabet, same word, okay? So things developed over time. And so the Hebrew, like in Qumran, is this kind of Hebrew over here, okay? And actually, Edie Robbins showed me a T-shirt that has it on it. And we think that the first Torahs were written in that script. And even the Talmud mentions that there were two different scripts, okay? The second script, the one that we know now, is Ashurit, Assyrian. We picked it up during the Babylonian exile. We picked it up, we became part of the community there, and we needed to communicate. And so in order to communicate, we adopted their alphabet. Sometimes we could still write Hebrew. We didn't have to speak Assyrian. We didn't have to speak Aramaic. By the way, we did. But when we wanted to write Hebrew, we adopted their alphabet because it was so similar to ours. It was easy to do that. And in fact, actually, when the Hebrew was rejuvenated by Eliezer ben Yehuda, there was a debate. Do we keep the Assyrian script that we're used to? Or do we actually start to use the Roman alphabet? Because the idea was the rest of the world, basically, or the rest of the Western world, was using that. And so it will allow more ease of use to just use the same alphabet. Books could be in the same direction. And of course, that fell by the wayside because of how traditional this was. The Talmud brings this up, but notes that when was the first Torah written in this Assyrian script, Ashurit, by Ezra the scribe, coming back to after the exile, after Cyrus allowed us to come back. And that idea of we kept our tradition, but we also were able to adapt is something that was seen as praiseworthy, to be able to hold on to that. We are so fortunate that we still have this Torah, and that in many ways it is unchanging. We can open it up and see words spoken by Moses, spoken by our prophets, and learn from it. It is so accessible. It speaks to the human soul. And yes, we need to study Hebrew to be able to do so. They added vowels for us so we can then use it a little bit. But we're able to hold on to this Torah and accept, as we always say, tradition and change. Next week, here's my plug. And here's basically where the theme came from this whole week, this whole month. Elon Gilad, who inspired this discussion about Hebrew, is going to be here. On Friday, he's going to really sort of just talk about his love for the Hebrew language. On Saturday, here at the service, he's going to talk about how the fact that even if Moses' Torah doesn't look like our Torah, it is still very much holy to him. I think you'll like his answer. And then if you stay after Kiddush, he's going to do, I think, what I love is fun part of how we look to Talmud, to the Bible, to all sorts of different ways to rejuvenate Hebrew, to make it a living language today. And so please sign up for Shabbat dinner. Come and hear Elon. Come here next week. And to add what Seth Horowitz told me as a joke last week, if you've ever watched the old Batman series, after a cliffhanger, they would say, join us this next week, letter bet time, letter bet channel. Shabbat shalom.